tons of commentary about what a pair of knuckleheads James and John must have been to ask such an inappropriate question. And that's fair enough. I mean, Jesus is trying to have a serious conversation about his own impending death, about how he would be betrayed and then handed over to the Gentiles to be mocked, spit upon, scourged, and ultimately killed. And then all of a sudden, James and John sidle up to him, wanting to secure seats on either side of him in his glory. Was that really a good time to bring this up? It'd be like saying, really? Can I have your car to someone who just found out they had a week to live? But we probably shouldn't lean too heavily on them, because Jesus didn't. Actually, it shouldn't come as a big surprise that these two should ask such a thing. Did you all know that James and John were also known as the sons of thunder? And that it was a nickname that Jesus himself gave to them? It's true, back in chapter 3, when Jesus was calling his apostles, he gave James and his brother John the title Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. That's the only place in the Bible that it even comes up. And that seems pretty relevant, because you don't get a nickname like Sons of Thunder for no good reason. It sounds like a motorcycle gang, doesn't it? It brings to mind big, burly, rough-hewn, amazing and colorful characters. Guys who would never back down from a confrontation. In fact, they probably look forward to them. They could have even been pretty aggressive. And clearly, they could also be very impetuous and insensitive. Like the time when the people in the village of Samaria were not responsive to the message of Jesus. And James and John wanted to call down fire from heaven on them. These guys just said whatever they thought. And they were just like us, hopelessly human and remarkably unremarkable. But at the end of their lives, these men, who were known as the Sons of Thunder, became known for something else. James was the first apostle to be martyred, and John became known as the Apostle of Love. And this is something that gets left out of the conversation a lot of times. Commentators and preachers are quick to point out the inappropriateness of their question and to dismiss them as a pair of dullards, but the thing that I notice is that when Jesus hears their request, he doesn't dismiss it. In fact, if you notice, Jesus didn't even tell the Sons of Thunder that there was something wrong with their request. What he did do was frame for them what the promotion that they sought might look like. Do you even know what you're asking? Can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink? Well, of course they think they're ready, but then the other apostles get wind of the request, and now they're mad. So now everyone is arguing, except, of course, for Jesus. And now he's just still as cool as a cucumber as he gathers them around for a little sermon on leadership and power. Jesus gets where they're at in their understanding. He knows that they are holding on to an understanding of Messiah that was popular at the time. For them, the Messiah was going to rise in power and lead a revolution. He would kick out the Romans and establish a powerful and independent kingdom of Israel that was even better than the one David had ruled over. The Messiah would be the most powerful person in the world, and no one could beat him. They've seen Jesus' power over the unbeatable forces of sickness, demons, and even the chaotic storms, so they cannot wait to see what he's going to do to those Romans. And, thought the disciples, we're in his inner circle, so we've got it made. But Jesus tells them that leadership is not about wielding power over people. It's about serving them. He tells them that with leadership comes sacrifice and service, self-denial, responsibility for others, call them names or ridicule them for their dark desires. He knows who he's dealing with. He called them for who they are. And now he's teaching them a better way. And they do learn it, and they model it, and they pass it on to us. Servant leadership is a hard concept to grasp for anyone, and it's even harder to model. There are a few people who have managed it, but even with them, if you start probing deeply enough, there's usually a long road of struggle attached to it. I was reading an interview on NPR on power that was talking about a new study that shows how power comes easiest to those who are humble and respectful. Well, that makes sense, but there's a catch. When we feel powerful, we have these surges of dopamine going through our brain that makes us feel like we could accomplish just about anything. And it is that very sense of feeling powerful that leads to the abuse of power. It's the easiest trap in the world to fall into for anyone. Just think about some of the leaders from history, many of whom started out with good intentions, but as they gained recognition, they became part of the problem. Just think about how it feels when you're winning at Monopoly. We've all been there, and we all know it does not bring out the pretty side of human nature. Those sneaky nets of desire for personal power and glory entangle and trap us all, each in our own age and in our own way. In 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. called it a drum major instinct in a sermon that he delivered at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. The drum major instinct, he said, is the desire to be out front, a desire to lead the parade, a desire to be first. In the body of his sermon, Dr. King spoke about the many different ways that we humans desire to be number one during all phases of our lives. Then he explained Jesus' reply to James and John. He said, Jesus gave us a new norm of greatness. If you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who is the greatest among you shall be your servant. That's a new definition of greatness. The sons of thunder believed that the systems were good, but that the wrong people were in the places of power. And they believed that once they came into their own alongside Jesus, everything would be fixed from the top down. Jesus immediately saw right through them. Sure, they wanted to sit next to him in glory, but what they really wanted was to be reassured of their greatness. They were aware that they were in the presence of greatness, but they were unsure of their own greatness. So their demand was the clumsy demand of vulnerable egos. Tell us that we are great, they were pleading. Deem us worthy. Include us in your community. And in response to these pleas, Jesus says, look, it's easy. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be a slave of all. The crucifixion is history. The resurrection, done. And the Sermon on the Mount has been preached. We and the disciples have been told by Jesus that if anyone would come after him, they will need to deny themselves and take up their cross. That's what we're about. In this strange building with its vaulted ceiling and stained glass, we proclaim this strange message that in order to find yourself, you have to lose yourself, and that faithfulness is measured by our willingness to take up our cross. We don't have all the answers. At best, we have managed to come up with a few good questions, but we know deep inside of each of us that there is a fundamental rightness about servant leadership. I know that because I see it all the time right here. And it is a beautiful thing. So with that, I will leave you with the ending of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s drum major sermon. If any of you are around when I have to meet my day, I don't want a long funeral. And if you get somebody to deliver the eulogy, tell them not to talk too long. And every now and then, I wonder what I want them to say. Tell them not to mention that I have a Nobel Peace Prize. That isn't important. Tell them not to mention that I have 300 or 400 other awards. That's not important. Tell them not to mention where I went to school. I'd like somebody to mention that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to give his life serving others. I'd like for somebody to say that day that Martin Luther King Jr. tried to love somebody. I want you to say that that day I tried to be right on the war question. I want you to be able to say that that day that I did try to feed the hungry. And I want you to be able to say that day that I did try in my life to clothe those who were naked. I want you to say on that day that I did try in my life to visit those who were in prison. I want you to say that I tried to love and serve humanity. Yes, if you want to say that I was a drum major, say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. I was a drum major for righteousness. And all of the other shallow things will not matter. I won't have any money to leave behind. I won't have the fine and luxurious things of life to leave behind. But I just want to leave a committed life behind. And that's all I want to say. May it be with you all, according to God's word. Amen. And now let us turn to page 340